Hello everyone, GM. Welcome back to another episode of Overpriced JPEGs. It is time for your Friday recap episode, and I'm coming at you from my parents' home.
I love
in Vermont.
The wallpaper back there. It looks like you're in like a 1980s like a sitcom in some way.
I know. I was saying to you before, I've got like these beautiful mountain views everywhere that I would love to set as my backdrop, but then it'll wash me out and you guys won't be able to see me. So I've decided that I am more important than the beautiful mountain views for the sake of this episode. And so
I would love somebody in our audience to make the sitcom opening of Carly with the little graphic down below, and she, do a pose like this real fast. Go.
Wait, for okay, what? Am I supposed to be Rosie the Riveter? What am I supposed to be?
Exactly. You're like part of the show where you're like the tough teenage daughter or something. Yeah. Oh,
I'm like the spunky kid.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, for those of you not watching on YouTube, I apologize, but I was doing a picture of Rosie the Riveter moment. In any case, I'm here in Vermont. It's lovely. I'm quite literally living the living manifestation of touch grass. I'm out here in some beautiful mountains touching all sorts of grass throughout the week. So we got a lot to talk about. We got ETH pumping, BTC pumping, which is going to get us into all the institutional stuff that's going on these days. We're going to talk about a couple of projects, a project you bought into, maybe with some regret here. We'll talk about Memeland, Bored Apes, Nike.Swoosh. We got a lot going on. But before we get into all that good stuff, we do need to hear a word from our lovely sponsors. Y'all know I think one of the most powerful use cases for NFTs are loyalty programs, which is why I'm so excited about our latest partner, GALXE. That's GALXE. GALXE is a leading platform for building a Web3 community. It is a no-code, plug-and-play solution to create task-based campaigns and loyalty programs. With over 67 million users, GALXE has worked with folks like Optimism, Polygon, Arbitrum, and more than 2,100 other partners with reward-based loyalty programs of their own. And I'm especially excited to announce their latest product offering, GALXE Mintlist. Mintlist enables NFT projects to issue allow lists based on different user profiles. It's free to use, and projects can then take advantage of GALXE's other offerings, like Task and Quest, which incentivize audience growth and user retention in the long term. Go beyond the mint and keep using GALXE's infrastructure to reward users through on and off-chain actions. GALXE's goal is to help projects grow in an authentic way and help them retain their users and communities over the long haul. And as a user, you can start contributing to your favorite Web3 communities today, joining allow lists through Mintlist and earning rewards, NFTs, oats, tokens, and points. Go to galaxy.com right now, that's GALXE.com right now, or click the link in the show notes to get started. Your Web3 community is waiting. I am so excited to announce that this year, Overpriced JPEGs has partnered with OPENSEA, the world's leading NFT marketplace, built for everyone, creators, collectors, noobs, and experts alike. I'm an OPENSEA user because they have the best selection of NFTs and a truly inclusive view of the ecosystem, supporting 8 chains and 8 global languages. I trust the systems they've put in place to keep the space safe, like copyright protection, malicious URL detection and removal, robust verification, and more. It's why they are the place to buy, sell, and create NFTs. That's right. You know OPENSEA, you use OPENSEA, but did you know that OPENSEA now has drops? New exclusive projects launch every week from top projects and creators, and you can check them out now using the link in the show notes. They also recently introduced self-serve drops, which is in beta, and allows creators to launch their projects right on OPENSEA. This drops product gives creators access to tools like rich storytelling drop pages, multi-chain support, and drop mechanic customization. The full launch for self-serve drops is coming this spring. So check out the upcoming drops on OPENSEA right now using the link in the show notes and own what moves you. You'll also be supporting the show in the process. All right, Gavin, let's start where we always do. Oh, I didn't tell folks you were here. Gavin's here, everyone. Gavin Purcell.
Hi, everybody. Hi.
Vibes check, man. How you feeling? And tell me what you bought yesterday, or was it yesterday that you bought?
It was last night. It was another dumb purchase. Gavin Purcell, dumb purchase number 5,044. But we'll say, so I think vibes, by the way, are really interesting. We went through a very weird week in that it felt like after the SEC news, crypto was going to be in bad shape. And I think a lot of people started to, I was really feeling, we've talked about this, but the capitulation feeling that we thought we felt a couple months ago has really started to kind of bubble up in a way that is good, I think, because I think we needed this real big capitulation. And I think that there was a worry when all the SEC stuff happened that like we might be like headed down for a while. And I think the weirdest thing to me is this Bitcoin ETF news seems to have brought crypto. I mean, I think ETH was down to almost 1,700, and now it's back up to almost 1,900. It's a very weird place to be. And yeah, so I'll explain this I don't want to give this project any sort of credit necessarily, because it was really me kind of just like diving in briefly, taking a break from my work and all this other stuff that had kind of been distracting me because I had mostly not been paying a lot of attention. But I opened Blur up, and there's a project that's doing like just insane volume, like volume that I haven't seen for 6 months, right? Like this is a project that was getting, and I saw it and it was very cheap and it had a free mint, and it looked like, interesting kind of art. The name of the project was Robobatos, which
not to be confused with Robotos.
Yes.
Friend Pablo, yeah.
And it wasn't great art, but it was kind of cute, and I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. I think it's interesting, and I grabbed a few pretty cheap under 0.01, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. And then it kept going. This volume kept going, and I was like, what is going on with this? I went to Twitter, and they didn't have a Twitter handle, which always worries me, right? When I'm looking at any sort of degen project, no Twitter handle is like red flag number one. But then I saw a few people tweeting about it.
Didn't stop you, though.
Didn't stop me. I saw a few people tweeting about it. And one of the things so this is a good example of what I think. There are two parts to the story. One is the volume is not a bad thing, right? Seeing this much volume makes you feel like, oh, there's enough people here. We all play the same game. We get involved in stuff. And if it gets volume, there's an interest there. But the other side of this is, we're in this market now, and we've said this on this podcast before, where things can get manipulated very easily, right? And something that people were pointing to with this particular project was, oh, the deployer is so old, and there's a lot of money in the deployer. I think the deployer was from like 700 plus days ago. When people see that, this is a scam that happens in shitcoins a lot, where I think, and I don't know this for a fact because I have not done this myself, but I think from what I've read, there is a way to buy older wallets. So when you deploy from an older wallet, there is this initial idea that like, oh my God, this is a wallet that's been in crypto. OG wallet. So that's what this narrative was going along. And I think that there's just this like desperate need for everybody to feel like something is going to move. And, narratives spin up so fast now, and then volume builds upon volume and volume. And meanwhile, cut to this morning, it's way back down again, and it clearly was manipulated. And it made me feel like stupid as usual, right? Because you're like, oh God, this dumb move. But also like, okay, not all of this volume was manipulated. There are people in this space waiting for projects that are interesting. And I think that, it's just been a while since we've seen new projects come out that are that interesting. I'm actually really kind of curious to see how the true big whatever, the Goblin Town
Big Ink.
Big Ink does, because this is a project that's been talked about for a while.
Well, Goblin Town pumped pretty heavily.
Yeah. Well, do you know why Goblin
70%.
Town pumped? Actually, we should talk about this real quick. Goblin Town pumped in part because the biggest video game in streaming right now is called Up Only. Have you heard about this? Yeah.
Wait, but is that why? That's why? Because I thought that was like earlier news. It's been pumping.
It's kind of connected. They're both connected in some ways, right? So you're right. It was pumping in part because of Big Ink, but this is, I think, what's driving it, and it's so fascinating. I know a little bit of the backstory here. So Up Only is a very fun game. I haven't played it yet, but I'm meaning to get into it this weekend. It's basically what they call a speedrunning game, which speedrunning is you try to move through a path as fast as you can. It's like an obstacle course, and it's very visually interesting. Like the obstacles go way up high, and there's these big things, but the main character has a Goblin Town NFT, the image of Goblin Town on his backpack while you're running through it. And clearly the person that made this game is a fan. There may be some sort of a connection. We don't know that for a fact because the Truth Labs guys tweeted about it. But it's really interesting. And one of the things I thought was interesting is all these Web3 gaming guys, the people that Bryson and the people we know were talking about it. It's like, this is a Web3 game, but it's not Web3 involved, right? And this is an example of how you can use a Web3 IP in a game that has at one point, I think it had 300,000 consecutive streamers streaming it. So you talk about visuals and about bringing eyes to this space, like that's a pretty big deal, I think.
Yeah, Alex saw the game, saw somebody streaming the game and said, this is the aesthetic of Goblin Town, and DM'd the developer.
No way. So he didn't know about it at all ahead of time.
No. And the developer's in another country. I'm trying to remember where, like as in not US based. I'm trying to remember where he is. I want to say like Eastern Europe. Alex said, and I can't remember now, but, and said he didn't respond to him. The developer didn't respond to him initially. And then Alex, like the next day DMs him again and is like, we have 150,000 Twitter followers or whatever. Yeah. And the guy DMs him back immediately.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And then we promote this. And he was like, all right, the developer was like, send me some visual assets, whatever. He sent him all a bunch of stuff from Goblin Town. And the developer apparently immediately got it and was like, oh yeah, like this fits the feel, the vibe.
So, okay, this is interesting. I didn't realize this. So the Goblin Town stuff wasn't in it until Alex and him connected?
Correct.
Wow.
And there's stuff, I won't say anything because there was something that Alex said on the podcast that he only allowed to be said because he knew the episode wasn't coming out until Wednesday.
Okay.
But there was some alpha, and I don't know when the alpha's coming out, so I don't want to say it and like prematurely. It's not like crazy, but it's just like next levels of the engagement between the two, right?
So
and
there's okay.
More things rolling out in the game.
That makes me even more interested in this story because it goes to show you what IP can mean, right?
Yes.
Like we talk about this. Like imagine, do you know the game Fall Guys? Have you ever heard of this game?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So Fall Guys is this very kind of mainstreamy game where it's like you're all racing to do different things. You have to knock each other off. It was a pretty big hit. It's not as big as it was, but it was a huge hit like about a year ago. Okay. That's a game where imagine if the Doodles IP suddenly were the Doodles version of this, and like it's not the traditional Web3 model for money, and like we'll talk about this later, but it's not gonna like necessarily put your bags and make them go up, but there is a world where if you get mainstream attention for something and then it's connective tissue, there's value there, right? And I think this is a really interesting thing. I've thought a lot about, the idea of trying to create games with web IP, and I think that there's Web3 IP, and I think there's a really interesting model there to do this thing that just you don't even think about the money side of it. You're just using the IP side of it.
You're gonna love this interview with Alex. Let me tell you.
Oh, good. That's great.
Because we talk. Their whole thing is really about like IP and the power of it, and if you just do a good enough job, like developing the IP. And my big takeaway was the story of how he connected with the Up Only guy and how that all came together felt like Only Up. Only Up? I always confuse because Up Only is the Kobe podcast, and I think Only Up is the video game. And I messed this up on. Right. I think, but in any case, like. There's this magic to Goblin Town. Only Up, yeah. There's this magic to Goblin Town that it just feels like it has that kismet magic of like things happen for it because it's got a really that's not to discredit in any way just the talent and of the people who put it together, but it's that perfect blend. Like anything that really makes it has to have a combination of super hard work and intelligence and everything else that goes into it, and then also a little bit of luck. And Goblin Town has just kind of hit that vibe at a lot of different points, right? When it launched, it kind of hit the right note, and then you have these random things happen, which is like, oh my gosh, this game fits it so perfectly. We're gonna do this collaboration, and we get it in right before the game totally takes off and everybody starts playing it on Twitch, right? Like it's just really interesting, magical little things that happen for Goblin Town that I think are quite interesting, and and of course is all credit to having built a really amazing kind of core fundamental IP that they continue to invest in.
And team, by the way, I do think like they have an incredible team socially. They know what they're doing, and they just know how to like execute smart.
Yep. Well, y'all are going to love this episode. Wednesday, the 28th, June 28th, it'll come out, so you guys will have to check it out. Okay, so just to close the loop on Robobatos, you bought in because you're like, fuck it, me like everyone else is looking for the next thing, and I want the fun magic of 2021 back. To which I say, ordinals. But fine, whatever. You chose to go the Robobatos route. Yeah. And... but you said the moment you were like, oh, shoot, I shouldn't have bought this, was when you saw the deployer narrative being such a big narrative, because you're like, I know this is kind of a telltale sign of like maybe a manipulation. And then lo and behold, it turns out that you were probably right because the thing is sort of, it seems like collapsed already. Okay, good takeaways for folks to know. I will say the thing that I'm kind of excited about, speaking of ordinals, is Memeland is taking their, I think, 111 remaining MVPs, which is their original collection. It's the most highly valued collection.
Which are worth a lot. They're worth like, I think, a 63 floor. Yeah.
Yes, a ton. So, and folks might remember this from my conversation with Ray Chan, but they sold when they launched You the Real MVP, their inaugural collection, they sold it for like 5.3 ETH. And they were trying to sell 420 of them, and they didn't sell out because that was a lot of money and they were launching this in a bear market. But they did sell a fair number of them, and they had 100 and change something, 120, whatever it was, left over that they moved to the treasury of, I guess, 9gag or whatever.
Yeah.
And they've used that as like rewards and as giveaways, and they've tried to leverage that in various ways, in the savvy ways that Ray always does. But they have 111 left. They're basically moving it, they're saying, and I don't know the technical logistics here, but they're inscribing them on Bitcoin and they're making them ordinals. I love this move. It's so funny because I was not as deep in the ordinal ecosystem, obviously, when DGods made their DGods ordinal move and what they did with their like treasury assets and moved them onto ordinals. But now I have a real appreciation for ordinals, as anybody who's remotely followed me for the last 2 weeks now knows. And so I think this is really cool. And I think you have a cool entrepreneur and a cool like project doing a thing on.
I have a question about this for you, because I want to know what your thoughts on this are. With the Leonidas episode, you're all talking about, he's thinking of like generative art as a really interesting use case for this. Original projects on there, like Taproot Wizard's interesting use case for this. Part of me is wondering with these projects like DGods and Memeland, and even when Yuga did their version of this, it's a little bit like exploitive of a movement, and I don't know if it feels as native to the platform. And when I say platform, in this case, I mean the Ordinals platform or BTC as a thing. Do you feel like I guess Memeland has such a big audience and such a big community, and shout out to Ray, who's done an incredible job of building that. Do you feel like these are going to mean anything to the Ordinals people, or are these just more like fun things to do for projects that are ETH projects first?
I think, first of all, that Ordinals people are mostly ETH NFT people.
Right, sure. That's true.
And that came out in the Leonidas episode, is like, we're talking about the same group. It's people who are probably still active in ETH NFTs, or Solana NFTs or Tezos, whatever. They're NFT people. They're not like Bitcoin people.
Right.
And so from that standpoint, I think the audience that you're catering to is much the same. For me, this is where the Bitcoin maxi narrative of like a truly decentralized network, like you cannot actually be manipulated by a centralized entity more so than any other crypto network, right? Like so long as humanity is here and servers are here, whatever you do here will continue to exist for the next 100 years. That is cool to me and resonates for me. So when I think about projects that feel like they're significant for some reason, which I feel like DGods is, because they've trailblazed in a number of different ways. Obviously, Yuga is, and I think doing the 12 vote thing was kind of a cool way to go about it. But we've talked about that on the pod before, I think. And then certainly the way that I feel like Memeland is, you combine that with the like immutability of Bitcoin, and it feels like you're creating a historic relic, even more than just by creating a ETH NFT. Now, maybe Memeland, nor DGods, nor maybe even Yuga, though I think it's much harder to make that argument with Yuga, will really stand the test of time. Maybe there'll be these blips that didn't really matter in the history of things, and so their ordinal assets won't mean anything. But if any of them do continue to matter, like having them on Bitcoin feels really cool.
Does that idea of keeping stuff around for a long time, I mean, that same sort of argument can be made for on-chain ETH NFTs, right? Like, is your argument that Bitcoin is like more significant in the way that it's like the chain that people expect will stick around, and ETH is that kind of that, but also maybe it's still a second banana to Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I'm a fan of on-chain ETH NFTs, as people know. Again, the long-running joke that I am an Avastar pumper, that I'm trying to pump and dump with Avastars. So, like,
and Anonymized, you and I both have our own on-chain.
I always bring up Avastars. We're getting old. You bring up Anonymized. We do the same shtick every episode.
Exactly.
And cyber brokers, and then I usually bring up cyber brokers. So, like, I love projects that are on-chain on ETH. So I certainly think that's interesting and important. Yeah. ETH is absolutely less decentralized than Bitcoin is. You do have, it's changing, right? You have the, sort of original fork of ETH, and you've got like ETH Classic, and then the Ethereum that we work on now. You have the Ethereum Foundation that makes upgrades, that make changes. I don't mind any of that, and actually I like that. That's why I like Ethereum, because I think it's an evolving network that does more than just store value, essentially. I think it can exchange value. I can think of all these things. But if you want just the pure Cadillac store of value chain, it is Bitcoin.
Right.
And so for me, if you're talking about something that is meant to be just like a pure collectible moment in time historical relic, Bitcoin is a very cool, is the Cadillac chain for that. And that's why it has a different feeling to me than ETH NFTs, which of course is my primary love.
How about we make Bitcoin babies, and it's like Beanie Babies in cut to next to the Bitcoin, so you can have Beanie Babies forever on Bitcoin. That sounds pretty good.
I mean, I don't hate it. I mean, this is where it's a combination of, I also don't want to, like, there is a premium quality to ordinals I would like to.
Bitcoin babies are going to be top of the line quality. You don't even know what they're going to look like yet. They're going to have little bees for their eyes, and they're going to have like giant like sunglasses. They're going to be holding signs that say, "I love Bitcoin." Satoshi's my
Gavin
man.
and I can't get work done because we just have stupid ideas. And by we, I mean Gavin.
That's right, exactly.
His dumb ideas. Some of which, and then every so often they're good. And I'm like, well, shit, how do we go do this thing? But
that's the hard part when you have 1,000 dumb ideas and one is
and
good. How do you figure out which one it is?
Like, yeah. Or just, to figure out how to execute. Okay, well, moving on from our just pure degeneracy here. We talked about this. I think we referenced this earlier. You've got crypto pumping, which I don't know. You sound surprised by it. I don't know if that's like an orthodoxy. Like a lot of people were surprised by it. I was initially surprised that ETH didn't like tank more upon the SEC suing
Me too.
Coinbase.
I mean,
Binance
it did
news.
tank, but it didn't tank hard, right?
Not really. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like, we didn't hit 3-digit ETH again by any means, right? And
No.
I guess part of that is like smarter money than I knew it was coming, even though like I kind of knew it was coming, but when I look back now at like the trajectory of things, like it was very obvious that this lawsuit was coming. Like that,
Right.
the SEC had been saying this now for several months that these were securities and Coinbase was operating an illegal securities exchange. So it really shouldn't have been a surprise. And maybe that's part of it, is that people weren't that surprised. Could also be what you and I think talked about, which is that there's almost a relief of like, great, let's just get some let's just move this thing along and put it in the hands of the court, because it was pretty clear the SEC wasn't going to do anything productive. So like, let's just put it in the hands of some litigators and see what a judge says. So I think there was almost relief there. But then you did have this moment where risk on assets were pumping a little bit off the back of the Fed news that they weren't going to do another rate hike. And you had, tech stocks doing well, and you didn't have crypto pumping. And so that was like, it was like
that
almost
was the
like,
part that was the downside.
Right. It was like, okay, it's not falling, but it's holding when it should be pumping, which is also bad news. And then, but I didn't necessarily think that was a place we were going to stay in part because there are these other forces that we've talked about, like the fact that you've got the Bitcoin halving coming in April of next year, and usually Bitcoin starts pumping 9 months or whatever it is prior to that, which would mean this summer. Like, I felt like there was still enough that I wasn't sure that we were like we're about to go see
Danger
again
mode.
3-digit E.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I wasn't particularly freaking out. And now, of course, it's pumping back again on this BlackRock news. Okay. Or the ETF news, but I think I'll categorize this as like broadly institutions making crypto moves. I think the big ones that we want to talk about are the Bitcoin ETF, and then this EDX exchange, which is this crypto exchange that is backed by Fidelity and Schwab and Citadel and a bunch of players, and I'll talk about that in a second. Okay, I was very dismissive of BlackRock's ETF last week.
I know you were. I want to say I was right. I was right.
Well, I was just like, in what fucking universe are they gonna let this thing go through?
Yeah.
But what do I know? And the prevailing sentiment now, though we still don't know.
No, we don't know.
We don't know. It has not actually been approved, but the prevailing sentiment is that BlackRock would not be doing this if they did not know that they could get it through.
I saw a stat that is something like, and by the way, this is just me remembering a stat I saw in a tweet, so if this is wrong, please, I'm sorry, but it said 575 to 1. That's how the record on success, which is pretty incredible on getting these kind of things through. Yeah, for BlackRock when they launch these things, which is pretty amazing.
And BlackRock has iShares or whatever, which is like their huge conglomeration of ETFs, right? So when I buy ETFs primarily, right? Like I buy just like baskets of stocks and indices and just like let it ride. And there's like the, kind of Vanguard indices, which I think are popular. And then you've got these like iShares ETFs, which are quite popular. And that's BlackRock's category. And I think this is what they're pushing, is it actually like a Bitcoin ETF within this like iShares universe. Clearly, I have no idea what like the technical term for this stuff is, but that broad category. The thing that's like first hilarious to me and this shows me how like deep into crypto I am in some ways, is like, why the hell would you even want to buy a Bitcoin ETF? Just buy Bitcoin. Like, I buy ETFs to get exposure to a broad category. Like, oh, I believe in technology, so I'm going to buy an ETF.
Or biotech or whatever else.
Right. Like, you want to get exposure to a sector, but instead of buying individual stocks in a sector, you just buy into the ETF, which is like a basket of tech stocks. And now, great, you have this exposure to the price movement of that industry. A Bitcoin ETF is like, we're just talking about Bitcoin. I have the answer, but go ahead.
Well, I'll give you my guess. How about I give you my guess and you tell me the answer? My guess is that this makes it easy for institutional money to understand that Bitcoin is a safe investment, or at least that there's an investment that there's somebody like BlackRock that's backing in some form or another. The other guess I would have, and this is, again, you might tell me this is absolutely wrong, but like, maybe there's an expectation there will be other companies that are somehow crypto based within this ETF. All right, give me the answer now.
Okay, so there are attempts at like blockchain ETFs, right? Which are companies who trade in who operate in blockchain, and that's been a thing for a little while now, whether it's been approved or not. Like, that's sort of that second category you're talking about. Your first answer was essentially right. I mean, it's a UX thing. You can now, if you get a Bitcoin ETF, you can now trade Bitcoin in the same way and on the same platforms that you trade your stock portfolio. Right. And you don't have to have a wallet, right? You don't have
interesting.
To, because the key thing to understand with an ETF is you don't own the Bitcoin. BlackRock will own the Bitcoin, and you are basically buying into something that gives you exposure to the price movements of it. So if the price of Bitcoin goes up, your ETF, which just reflects that, will go up, but you as the individual don't actually own the Bitcoin, which is why me as a crypto native is like, what the fuck is the point of owning Bitcoin if you don't own the Bitcoin? But that's because I, in addition to liking crypto for a lot of, like, there is a utility there to me. Not that I'm expecting to have to like flee a border with my Ledger device, but the idea that I can is part of the appeal of crypto. You know, and nobody was fleeing Ukraine with their like iShares ETF, you know, like it's, I mean, actually, whatever, don't come at me. But like, the point is to own the thing itself. And ownership is such a big part of crypto culture and like digital ownership that it's kind of hilarious to own like an abstracted piece of paper saying that somebody else owns the Bitcoin and you get exposure to the price movement. But the truth is, this is incredibly helpful from a UX and just getting institutional people in who want Bitcoin price exposure. And so who the hell cares? Great. It's a win. It's a win to me for the industry. I know some folks are like hesitant around it because they feel like this is banks getting involved in a thing that is fundamentally anti-bank. Yeah. But I don't have those same hang-ups.
I mean, this was always going to be the crossroads we hit with the crypto industry, right? Like, I think that the thing I'm always fascinated with as somebody who came to crypto relatively late is that it started in a lot of ways with these kind of like, you know, libertarian ideals, right? The idea of like kind of breaking away from the societal banking and all that sort of stuff. And there is a limited audience for that, no matter what those people believe. And when I say limited audience, I mean, yes, I believe what you're saying too is really interesting. And I think that like, I actually talked to somebody that was really smart in the TradFi world the other day, and they were actually like, look, we should just freaking call these things securities. They're very heavy crypto people. It's like, we should just call these things securities so that we can bring on all of these massive money pots that will come in when those things do. And yes, will Coinbase and all these companies and Binance like go down because they were created with these things the wrong way? Probably, but also for the overall crypto industry, that's great. This is where the divide happens, right? Is there's the people in crypto who really want to believe in the decentralized part, which I think is great. And, you know, you have the Balajis of the world who like are saying that, you know, the dollar is going to inflate in an insane way and holding crypto is a smart way to hedge against that. My thought with this is, you know, if BlackRock starts an ETF, or it sounds like they're going to, where does like Balaji fall? I mean, Balaji's going to own Bitcoin no matter what, right? But like, does he think that's a positive thing like in that world, or is that a negative thing for his take on this? I would imagine if you're able to buy a Bitcoin ETF, you're at least protecting yourself from the inflation of the US dollar in some form or another, but you're still connected directly back to this other corporation. I think it would be really interesting to hear like I'm sure they exist already. There's probably 1,000 of them, but hearing like the hardcore Bitcoin maxis talk about this. Yeah. Because in part it's like great for their bags, but it's also like the opposite of what Bitcoin was meant for.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine the take is like, positive that more people are getting exposure to Bitcoin and that it pumps your bags, but they wouldn't recommend this because the whole thing, that whole worldview is about the fundamental corruption of centralized entities and government. And what you're doing is putting your Bitcoin price exposure into the hands of a very centralized, tied to the US government entity. I fall somewhere in the middle, right? Like I'm a little bit of a, I'm like a skeptic. I think get groups of people anywhere with some level of kind of monopolistic power and you're going to have a lot of corruption. So I don't, but I don't go as far as like a super crypto maxi on this stuff of full blown conspiracy theorist probably. But I would imagine I would imagine Balaji's take is like, well, great, sure, I'll take it over not having it, but I wouldn't recommend anybody get their Bitcoin exposure by doing this. I mean, he was saying get your coins off of all centralized exchanges and go move to Dubai, right? So he's definitely not advocating anybody do this, but I also would think that maybe he doesn't necessarily dislike it. One thing I just want to push on what you said there. I mean, it's interesting. I'm a big believer, as folks who listen to this podcast know, of do what we have to do to get mainstream adoption, even if it means diluting some of the values here a little bit, which is why I'm in favor of something like this. Like I'm all for an ETF because it means that more people will get into the ecosystem. I'm not going to personally buy it. I'd much rather own the Bitcoin itself. But the idea that like just say these things are securities and register them, that's just not feasible. Like who is the issuing entity of Solana? Like that's the whole problem, is that you quite literally can't fill out the form to register these things as securities. Again, or Ethereum's the better example because Ethereum's less centralized than a Solana is, right? Like how are you saying it's not the Ethereum Foundation at this point? And this goes back to the conversation we had last week about things being able to morph from once having been securities, maybe in their earliest days, to being a decentralized network in which they're clearly not securities because the facts and circumstances have changed. And if folks missed either my conversation with Karen Ubell, which I think was 2 weeks ago, or the conversation Gavin and I had about it last week, talking about some of the documents that had been released as part of the Ripple XRP, the Hinman documents, go check out those episodes. I think they're still super relevant and kind of interesting. So and we'll keep covering all this. Let me introduce you to a brand new company that I could not be more excited about, Web3 Sense. A Web3 analytics platform that combines on-chain data with social media insights to give you the deepest, most meaningful intelligence into any NFT community. I have tested other analytics platforms out there, but Web3 Sense has the most comprehensive capabilities I've seen in the NFT ecosystem. They apply sophisticated data science to wallet histories to determine behavioral patterns and help shape predictive analytics. In other words, they can tell you which Twitter accounts are actually the influencers in your space. And they can tell you what resonates most within a community by looking at what other communities token holders are involved in. The number of use cases here is virtually unlimited. So whether you're a trader, creator, institution, brand, agency, I promise Web3 Sense has data that you want to see with the deep and actionable insights that you need to build, analyze, grow, start, whatever you want to do within the NFT space and in terms of building a business and a community. Now, they are still in very early days, so they're eager to connect with the community. So if you're interested in learning more about what Web3 Sense can do for you and your business, and you should be, go and fill out the very short form linked to in the show notes, and someone from their team will reach out with more information and an opportunity for a product demo. Trust me, you won't regret it. Y'all know I love Ledger, the world leader in critical digital asset security. When you own crypto, what you actually own is a private key that gives you access to your coins. It is imperative that you keep this key safe, and Ledger wallets are the best way to do that. The Nano S Plus and Nano X Ledger wallets, paired with the Ledger Live app, give you the best way to start your crypto journey while maintaining full control over your digital assets. Send and sign your NFT transactions with full transparency in the Ledger Live app. What you see is what you sign. And y'all have heard me talk about Ledger Stacks before. Well, due to unprecedented demand, Ledger has received all the Ledger Stacks pre-orders that it can fulfill through summer 2023. And so they have decided to pause the pre-orders. Ledger is incredibly grateful for the community's support and is working hard to get current pre-orders out and ready to ship so that they can make even more Ledger Stacks to keep your digital assets secure. Sign up for the Ledger Stacks waitlist and be the first to know when Ledger Stacks are available again for pre-orders. But don't leave your digital assets susceptible to breach or hack in the meantime. Order your Nano S Plus or Nano X today by visiting shop.ledger.com or clicking the link in the show notes. The last thing I'll say on this, and then I want to talk about this EDX exchange, is there was a really good thread by a guy named Joe McCann on Twitter. And he was kind of talking about BlackRock's broader strategy, which is very focused, in his words, on Bitcoin and stablecoins, and specifically USDC. BlackRock invested $400 million in Circle.
Oh, wow.
And
I didn't know that.
yes.
That's interesting. Huh.
And they launched a Circle Reserve money market fund, like an MMF. So they are like also pushing heavily on incorporating Circle into their platform. They have something called Aladdin, which is like a tool that investment management companies and individuals can use to like manage to track all the portfolios they manage and manage risk and whatever else. And Circle's getting integrated into that. They then ran a trial with Coinbase. They integrated Coinbase to test Coinbase as a custodian for Bitcoin. And then after having done that for several months or whatever the time frame was, that's when they have now launched this Bitcoin ETF thing.
Okay.
So in the telling of Joe McMahon on this Twitter thread, it was like they've kind of had this systematic approach on the stablecoin side. I mean, they apparently have been lobbying heavily for the stablecoin bill that people may have been following that is expected to pass in DC. And anyway, so just really an interesting view on what BlackRock's overall crypto strategy is and this focus they seem to have on both stablecoins and Bitcoin. And one of my takeaways here from this thread is like, and also trying to kind of control those flows, control the USDC, flow, and then control the Bitcoin flow and, whatever. There's a kind of a cynical underpinning there. But anyway, it's interesting. I'll make sure we link to the thread below. There's a lot of stuff in here he says that I don't fully understand. The only last thing that I would mention is it's important to distinguish that what BlackRock is applying for here is a spot ETF, which is what we already have Bitcoin ETFs, but they're future contracts ETFs. And so you're basically like speculating on the future price of Bitcoin, and you're buying a Bitcoin derivative as opposed to
Actually,
well, again, you're not actually buying Bitcoin with a spot ETF, but you're buying. BlackRock will actually own the Bitcoin,
right?
And then you'll trade on the price movement of that Bitcoin. Right. Whereas a futures ETF, the underlying entity doesn't even necessarily own Bitcoin either. Right. They like also own like derivatives of Bitcoin. I mean, you start.
So
to
the big thing here is that BlackRock, if this works, is going to be buying a crap load of Bitcoin.
Correct. That would be my understanding. I mean, they will need to own the Bitcoin upon which they issue that the ETFs like track basically. So that should be true.
By the way, before we move on, there is one last thing I want to mention. BlackRock is a fascinating company, and if you dig into it, like, it is amazing how big and how many tendrils it has. There's an amazing TikToker who's been doing this story where he goes around grocery stores and shows like who owns stuff in the companies in the grocery stores. BlackRock is in almost every like major CPG company in the world. Like they are like the tendrils of BlackRock goes so far into so many things. It's, you talk about conspiracy theories. This is like a good thing to dig into, but like the company's fascinating, right? It is a giant, massive. I think that I think they have like $4 trillion under their management, which seems
I think it's 11 trillion.
That's insane, right? Like that's just
assets.
How big it is. Like it's crazy to me to think about.
10 trillion.
10 trillion. So a company.
BlackRock reported assets under management of about 9.09 trillion as of the end of the first quarter of 2023.
Right.
So I don't know, somewhere between like 9 and 11 trillion.
That's just a bonkers number when you think about like what the availability of money in the world is, right? Like it just in terms of what that is. So anyway, I think it's an important thing for not only this thing to be happening, but if you don't know what BlackRock is, like look into them. And the company's fascinating and it's worth like reading up on.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the institutional movers here, so the second story that we wanted to touch on is this EDX exchange that apparently people have known about it for a number of months, but it just went live actually starting to like execute trades, I guess. So this is an exchange that's backed by Fidelity, Schwab, and Citadel. So again, you've got major institutional players. And my takeaway here is that what this exchange is about is like separating out functions that in most crypto exchanges have been vertically integrated. So I am not the expert here, and I don't want to promise anything, but like I actually am going to look into getting somebody on to talk more about this because I think it's relevant as we dive into all these things. But like a traditional investment bank has like a sales and trading desk, an investment banking desk, and a clearing desk, and these things are separated from one another. And you have like you have sort of this like separation of church and state, not to call it that, but like which is supposed to de-risk things and like, you know, minimize the risk of like corruption or whatever else. I'm sure there's other purposes for it. So somebody who works at Goldman come like yell at me about like what the actual purpose of all these different divisions are. But the idea that is true, you know, that I know for sure is like one of the things that's kind of controversial about a Coinbase is basically everything is in-house. This is what went wrong with FTX. FTX was not only executing trades, matching borrowers and sellers, they were also then custodying the assets, which is what allows them to then do a bunch of shady shit.
Yes.
So what this EDX exchange is like separating out like, you know, prime brokerage and custodying. And so like third parties are going to custody all of your assets. They won't custody your assets, even though they'll, I believe, market make buyers and sellers. So let me read this quote, which also helps to illustrate this a little bit. So it says that later this year, EDX plans to launch a clearinghouse to facilitate the process of settling trades. But even then, it plans to use third-party banks and a crypto custodian to hold customer assets. In contrast, crypto exchanges typically require their customers to park their digital coins in wallets run by the exchange, creating the risk that the exchange could lose the funds or be tempted to misuse them.
Right.
So that
tempted to misuse them is amazing that we have to put that in there. Like, how often have banks, like, I mean, I guess it has happened over the course of history, but like, Jesus, like, man, what a crazy thing this world is.
Well,
like,
we're unregulated. That's the problem with, you know, FTX is parked in the Bahamas. And look, obviously what they were doing was illegal still, but like, you know, you have an unregulated industry and you're going to get this shenanigans.
Can you imagine that life, by the way? We should just take a second to imagine what the FTX life was like at the peak. Like, it was just like they were printing money. They were living in the Bahamas. They were having their weird, you know, we've heard a lot of the stories about what their life was like. That would be just like a couple years of yours. Even if you were in jail, you would never forget, right? Yeah. You would just never forget those years.
You definitely would never forget. You'd be sitting in jail being like, oh, the good old days, sitting in the Bahamas.
Exactly.
That would be, you would remember it every day. I knew, I don't know personally, but I'm quite close with, I have some friends who now work with some former developers for FTX who had no idea what was going on. I mean, they were just like code robots, you know, who were like super like just executing on what they were told to execute on. One of them sat apparently, you know, who knows this lore, like 10 feet from SBF in the Bahamas, and literally the day was all collapsing, like was still shipping code. And finally somebody came over to them. He was just like in the zone again, like somebody had to come over to him and give them the like, hey man, it's over. Like take the headphones off, don't ship the code. It doesn't matter. It's all going down. Like this whole thing has been an illegal scam, you know. You didn't
You're going to have to go back to Des Moines. You don't get to live in the Bahamas anymore.
It's all over, Well, anyway, the last thing I'll say as we talk about this EDX exchange that's interesting is the only coins that trade on it right now are Bitcoin, Ether, Litecoin, and Bitcoin Cash.
Right.
And what these have in common are that Gary Gensler, some number of years ago, gave a speech.
Right.
He actually said 70% of crypto wasn't securities. Oh, how times have changed. But he specifically cited these four, Bitcoin, Ether, Litecoin, and Bitcoin Cash, as not being securities. So it's just fascinating to watch how different institutions are approaching this, right? You have BlackRock going in on a stable coin and on Bitcoin. You have this EDX exchange. So you've got Fidelity, Schwab, and Citadel going in on these four assets, Bitcoin, Ether, Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash. I don't want to get into this right now because there's a lot of conspiracy swirling that I want to look into, but this Prometheum thing, which is this like, this, you know, securities compliant custodian, whatever they're trying to be, that's making a bet on all of these things basically being securities except for Bitcoin. Like it's just fascinating to watch how different entities are playing this. All of it feels, I have that feeling of, I feel both excited by it because, again, I want institutions playing in this space. I think that's good for the space overall. And also that feeling of like, is the rug being pulled out under us? And are there actors here that are going to try and co-opt this for their own gain in some way? And we're all getting played. And I'm balancing those two emotions.
I get it. I mean, this is what I was saying about the BlackRock thing. It's like, it's a fascinating company when you dive into it and all these things. Like, you at some point you start to feel like outclassed by the people who have way more money than you and have way more experience in business side than you, and like you just like you try to be like a little like, you know, guppy following along when these giant whales are playing these games. The same thing happens in NFTs all the time, right? It's like you can learn, but you're not going to be able to operate at the level that they're operating at because the capital is just insane.
Massive. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Let's move on to our final two stories. I want to talk about Bored Apes, who, I called the bottom way too early, as it would turn out. I got the bottom like 2 months ago, and it was not the bottom. So we'll talk about Bored Apes. We'll talk about Nike and the Epic Games partnership. But let's start with Bored Apes.
Okay, great.
Where do you want to start on this story?
Well, okay, I think
a lot going on.
Let's give some basic facts right now. I think there's a lot of of apes feeling sad right now, and I think mostly that's due to the fact that
the Bored Apes are now sad apes.
So sad apes. Sorry, the ape floor for the main collection is like 38 right now, which is very low. And it's funny, we always talk about the fact of like punks and apes kind of being equal, and punks have stayed around 48, 49, so they've been able to hold as Bored Apes have been dropping. And I think this, going back to our conversation, like this all kind of felt like it was happening around the stuff last week. And I think people are very worried about what ApeCoin is. And ApeCoin had a big drop off, right? And I think there's this conversation of whether or not ApeCoin is a security is a big question mark. And apes, I think in general, had already started, I think we talked about Daniel...
Allegre?
We talked about Daniel Allegre's coming to the forefront as the CEO of this company and a gaming company, which is really smart and great. But what they had tried to accomplish before he came on is a very large, very huge roadmap, right? Like to become a AAA game developer of a mainstream metaverse game is a very hard thing. And, they had a ton of funding. They raised a bunch of money, and they are at least well capitalized still. But I think this is my take on what we're seeing here right now is there's a lot of apes out there who are complaining a little bit about like, what have you done for us lately? Which is hilarious to me because there is no project that has given more value back to holders than Apes. I think I saw a stat.
Of course.
$500,000 possible of free money basically given to holders of Apes, which is insane when you think about it. It's like one of the biggest, like if you had minted Apes, it is probably one of the biggest, best investments you could have ever made in your life, bar none. Right? Like within, if you had, now granted, you have to know where the peak was and you would have had to like sell Ape in the 20s. And now I think it's under 5, like all these different things. But it just goes to show you like even that company, even the company that has delivered more value to holders than anyone else is under constant pressure to deliver more. Right? And this is the trickiest thing.
There's so much here in some ways, and some of which we've talked about before. Let's do this. I'll say, so the floor price is struggling. You've got issues around liquidations too, because as we all know, there's like points at BendDAO at which you start to get liquidations with some of this like leveraged NFT stuff. So, that's playing into this. You've got a blur component to this story. You do have news out of Yuga, which is they released their Heavy Metal Forge. That's their next game that they started teasing. The trailer for that has come out. But look, at the core, when it's like, what have you done for us lately? What does that show us? It shows us what we all freaking knew, right? Which is that nobody was bought into Yuga for gaming. They were bought in for the free money drops.
Yeah.
And you can't just continue to airdrop assets to a holder base. That's not sustainable. This is not a good market for anything, right? It's not a good market for new assets coming on board. And Yuga already has a lot of assets out in the world. They can't just continue to create new supply. And so that makes me very nervous because if you look at, and Yuga is doing so much, they have so much coming up. They've got Legends of Mara, they've got the heavy metal, they've got obviously the bigger other side vision that they're doing. People are still speculating around Ape Fest, et cetera, et cetera. What of any of that is worth $80,000, $75,000. And I've said this a lot on the podcast through the years of like, what could they act? And this is why it's always, it's not just buy the rumor, sell the news, but we reward abstraction and we we punish specificity in this space because there's very little tangible goods that, or experiences that you can be given that are worth $80,000 to you. And it feels like we're finally starting to hit this point potentially with Apes where it's delivery time and they're just going to start delivering the things they've been promising.
Yep.
And people are going to start saying, and people are already starting to say, this isn't worth, I'd rather have my $80,000.
Well, and what's interesting also, what's not at all what it used to be value-wise is the PFP signaling value of an ape. And the question becomes was that PFP signaling value of an ape because it was worth multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you could say I was either dumb slash smart slash dumb enough to hold on to this from like, you know, $25 or whatever it minted at to this amount of money, or I bought into this at this amount of money and look how rich I am. Like, that's the interesting thing to me, that still NFTs are, that's a big part of their value. And when you think about projects like Apes or Punks or anything like that, you are signaling something significantly when you use that as your PFP, or that's part of your identity. You're signaling, I am wealthy enough to make this part of me. And I think that's interesting, as the wealth of that has come down, that the signal becomes much weaker because it's not as interesting to signal that aspect of it.
Well, in some ways also, as you drive up the utility, you also hurt the signaling element. And so this gets into, you were doing the Apes Punks comparison. And one thing, and I think this came from NFT stats, that he was saying is like, if you look at new holders listing Apes for the first time versus new folks listing Punks for the first time, because we know that there's wash trading happening with all these things, and on Blur people are airdrop farming, and so you have a core group of people that are constantly cycling through buying Apes, selling Apes, and doing the same with wrapped Punks. But the number of like new people who are listing Apes has been much higher than the number of new people listing their Punk. Right. And that's because by not making Punk a utility token, by saying this is purely a historical artifact, it's art, it's whatever you want to say, it actually maintains its signaling value. Yeah. Yeah. Even aside from price fluctuations a little bit more, than when you start to flip into, okay, Apes isn't like a signaling thing anymore. It's truly about, it's actually about playing a game. When you make that mental shift, then that's when you start doing this direct ROI thing of like, well, which would I rather have, $80,000 or, you know, the ability to get early access to play Legends of Mara, right? And it's like, well, it's going to be $80,000. So I think that's really interesting. You also had bidders pulling out. I know at least on the Blur side, like you've just had these bid walls that had been in place for Apes start to disappear. And so it's that confluence of new people are starting to list their Apes more and more. You've got bidders pulling out of wanting to buy the Apes. I mean, I'm literally describing what happens when a price goes down, right? Like demand goes down and supply goes up. That's quite literally the dynamic that's at play here.
I mean, listen, the thing I'm not looking forward to is the literally hundreds and thousands of TikToks, tweets we will see about how's it feel owning that ape now? Is it worth blah blah blah? Because I think there's a lot of Schadenfreude that's going to be coming out of this. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of people that are going to be coming out and saying like, because honestly, here's what I'll say about apes. And again, don't come at me, Bored Ape community. I think you're very strong. You do a lot.
They're fudding it worse than you are now. So
I know. I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of what Yuga's trying to do, and I think their casual game strategy is smart. Although I wasn't a super big fan of the trailer, I think they're going the right direction. There's no world in which like apes couldn't just drop down under 10. Do you know what I mean? Like there is a real significant job. Like there is a momentum thing that will happen. And like, you know, apes, it's hard because when you see them so high for so long, like there's a world where you think, oh, this is a project that's going to be. I was in the Moonbirds world, right? Like I had a Moonbird and I actually bought a Moonbird at a very inflated price that is now worth a tenth of that price, right? And like, these projects can fall. And the tricky thing, and people always used to say, is like, as apes go to market, the question is like now, you know, with Captain Suzuki and a few other things that are coming up, like
DGods is pumping.
DGods.
I mean, DGods is doing great. DGods is what, over 10 ETH and like.
So all three of those projects are interesting in that they've got founders who are front and center and understand the Web3 space. And by the way, again, Daniel, like, a super smart person, but Gordon and Gargamel have not been front and center, right? They have kind of. I mean,
you have, you know, Aaron now having to step back, and you know he was very involved in the trial of Jimmy the Monkey. Like a lot of stuff that was his creative brainchild. I know. You know, I don't know what happens to that, but I do think he was a significant contributor, obviously, to Apes and how it grew. And you're now missing that key player. You know, for
and
very
one last thing
reasons.
I'll say about this is, you know, Apes got very lucky in terms of when they took their funding. They made they took at a very high valuation. What everyone should know is across the entire startup ecosystem, not just Web3, there are down rounds all over the place, right? The startup ecosystem is struggling in a significant way because a lot of companies got funded in what was a very hot zero interest rate market. And I would assume that, I mean, luckily for Apes, they've got this big kind of cash bucket, but you're right. I think the question would be like, how does that company now make money going forward? Because this is also the thing we've talked about on this podcast a lot. you front load all of your income, right, from your consumers and customers. The thing about the heavy metal game is like, okay, well, I can see this as a casual game and it could be interesting. And one of the ways casual game works is in-app purchases. But if the game's not playable by anybody except for Apes, and if you start charging Apes for shit within their game, they're going to get pissy because I already spent X number of dollars on this thing. How does that business model play out? Like, what does it look like?
Have they said heavy metal will be only playable by
No,
Apes?
I mean, but they and I hope it isn't, because like that was the problem with Dookie Dash in my mind, right? Like it was, you had to be a holder. So I hope that it's not going to be. I hope everybody can play it in some form.
Because I asked Daniel about this. They won't. I don't know about heavy metal specifically, but like they are certainly aware. They are testing a lot of different models. That's literally what he said, I think, is like we're exploring everything. So my guess would be that with all these various different casual games they're dropping, the Dookie Dash, the Legends of Mara, the heavy metal, like they will probably experiment with different models of doing things for each one, because I think they're in exploration mode about what the final model for all of this will look like. Not that there even will be necessarily an end state. I imagine it might even be evolving within that. God, they have a lot of stakeholders to keep happy, and a lot of different, like you have ape holders, you have other side land deed holders, you have coda holders. I mean, like this was my thing. I did an episode of the podcast over a year ago at this point that was really popular, saying like, our metaverse land sale is a good idea. And part of the challenges with them are you now have an obligation, or you feel this sense of obligation to a group of people who happen to be available at 7 p.m. on a random May night in 2022, who happen to get in and buy other side deeds. Yeah. Which, if you're building out a platform that is based on user generated content and engagement, the people you want to actually be rewarding are the people who are contributing most to your game, not to the people who happen to buy the land. And so again, now you're in the position of having to like appease both those groups. Like they just have, and so this, getting back to the point you were just making, it's like you have to appease ape holders, and ape coin holders, I should say, and other side holders, but you also need to make sure that new people are coming into your ecosystem. It's a lot that they're taking on, and I totally could see them succeeding with it. I think it's a super smart, talented team, but what happens to the value of the assets? Can they?
And I mean, it's a Ponzi ultimately, and this is the downside of all this stuff, right? Like honestly, you look back on this, it made zero sense for the other side meant to happen, right? When you're this far away from a game, 100% you should not do this, and I really believe that was an income driving thing for Yuga, and because of their business model, because of what they did and how Ape, you could buy it in Ape, like all of that was playing into this business model. But the business wasn't actually a business. It was literally creating new virtual products, selling it, creating new virtual products, selling it. But if the product itself has no use case, if you have nothing you can do with it, like there is zero reason for it to exist.
Yes, and to be clear, my stance on Yuga is these assets all absolutely actually do have utility. They're not like some of these other NFTs. There are uses for it if you'll get access.
But other side deeds, what? Yeah, is in the future use? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Like they are clearly building a bigger vision in which these things seemingly will have value or some use. You'll have different resources on different plots of land. I mean, I don't know how they'll play it all out. I mean, I've talked about this before too, because Axie has had a big problem with this because they sold land plots, and like the land plot holders are very frustrated, have long been very frustrated by that. But point being, I think Yuga, more than 99% of NFT projects certainly have created utility. It's just that the utility doesn't justify the price. Right. That's the problem, is like, sure, there'll be some utility, but maybe it's $100 of utility.
My argument with this would be, and I mean, we've talked about virtual land forever, but like the idea in my brain of what the utility of owning a piece of other side land is great. But until I'm walking on that land myself, there is zero utility. There is zero utility. And by the way, not only is it like I can't walk on that land doesn't really exist. It exists in a graphic form, but like that, now we are 1 year plus out from that mint. We could be another year out before there's any sort of utility to be seen from that. So my argument is only in those instances, I think the market dynamics and probably investors drove them to do that mint, which didn't make sense. Even if we were still in a bull market, none of this would make sense. It would not make sense for me to own a piece of virtual land that has nothing happened over the course of 1 year. Now, I would love to hear, people from the ape ecosystem tell me like why that matters. But I think even until that land is something, I guess what I'm saying is I need to buy a piece of virtual land and be walking on that within at least 6 months, or I feel completely mad about it.
Well, you're getting obviously the early access to the demos they're doing.
What there's been two of. There's been two of in a year and 3 months.
Dookie Dash passes, the sewer passes, were they dropped to other side holders?
Nope.
Just Apes?
Just Apes.
Got it. Interesting. Well, I feel lame because I feel like we're just fair weather friend. Like, if it was pumping, we'd be justifying why it's pumping. I will say I have been saying this for a very long time. Like the punishes specificity, rewards abstraction. I've been saying for a long time. I don't understand how you continue to justify, back when it was a 70 ETH floor, like a 70 ETH floor for Apes.
Oh, for sure.
I also think there's plenty of wonderful good things to say about Yuga. I think that they are starting to, hit upon their thing that has always been like kind of a fundamental challenge, the final boss or whatever in terms of the obstacle. Okay, to move us along for time, I'm going to move us to Nike.Swoosh, some exciting news. You made this point, maybe you make this point about like why .Swoosh maybe gets, and it gets plenty of attention, but in some ways it gets less attention than you feel like it should. But they just announced this partnership with Epic Games. Maybe you've been following this more closely than I have. Walk me through exactly what this all involves.
Yeah, so they announced partnership. So very quickly, to people who aren't familiar, .Swoosh is Nike's kind of like digital goods / Web3 initiative, separate from Artifact, right? So just if you're familiar, Nike bought Artifact in December of 2021 for an undisclosed sum, but we assume quite a bit of money. This is the company Artifact makes Clone X. They made virtual goods before that. Nike bought them, and kind of like that was their entry point into Web3. This company, .Swoosh, is an entirely separate division within Nike that is specifically created to essentially create a Web3, they don't say Web3 a lot, but digital goods brand within Nike itself, right? And this is a very encouraging thing for all of us because Nike is one of the largest corporations in the world. They're very smart with marketing. They know what they're doing. The integration of the Fortnite is fascinating because what it does is it follows up on the idea that .Swoosh basically is a digital identity that you can have as a Nike like customer, basically, that if you kind of follow on this pathway. And if you log into this Fortnite experience, it is not like main Fortnite. It is like a created Fortnite world. If you log into this Fortnite experience, your character can get these kind of like very cool Nike shoes within Fortnite, but also you get a soul-bound NFT that is for you for connecting to this world in your .Swoosh account. What's really interesting about this is what I believe is the real mainstream use case of NFTs, right? This is what people have been talking about forever. It is a major corporation making virtual goods interesting in the internet, in the digital environments, in Fortnite, which is what everybody sees as like kind of the main metaverse of the world. And I think it's getting undercovered in the world because when I say in the world, I mean in the Web3 world, because it is not worth any money. There is no place to trade it right now. They have teased there's going to be a marketplace coming. There's no place to trade it. But this is the future that we should all be hoping for, right? Like this is the world this is the prince that was promised in the Game of Thrones reference. Like we want major corporations who are smart at marketing, who are smart at product to be deep in this space, because this is going to grow the pie. And I think that to me, like this follows up on the fact they announced an integration with EA Sports where .Swoosh items would come to EA Sports. So you have another metaverse in that world where you've got the EA Sports world and Fortnite. .Swoosh is doing super interesting stuff, but it's just not getting a lot of coverage because it's not being sold for a fortune.
And those assets that'll be with EA Sports will be NFTs?
They haven't announced that yet. They've announced a digital partnership, and I think that probably it'll be something similar where it will be something to live in your wallet. And I bet you'll like EA Sports, for those who play games, has had a long history and a lot of like people mad at them because of the stuff you can buy within game,
right?
And like add-ons and shit like that. So I think that it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think that hopefully, yes, it will be NFTs or some sort of similar sort of vibe.
And are these the existing like the Air Force Ones, which I know was like the big drop that Nike did? They were on Polygon?
They're on Polygon. Yeah.
That's what I thought. I mean, look, it's not dissimilar to the Starbucks stuff, which like everyone in NFTs likes to kind of point to, but very few people I think are like, because they're on Polygon, it's hard to trade, it's hard to buy. You know what I mean? Like you kind of have to live within the corporation's ecosystem as of now. And I don't think either of these corporations are bought into that having to be the case. Like I know Starbucks would buys into interoperability and is happy to have these assets trade elsewhere. It's just clunky right now to do it, and And as a company, you have to be strategic about how you go about that to avoid it becoming just a totally financialized, speculative instrument in a way that kills off the fundamental goals you're trying to achieve, which is loyalty and things. But I agree. I think this is really interesting. Explain what they're doing with Epic, who I know Epic has made the statement saying that they're not doing anything themselves around NFTs, but they're also not opposed to them. Like, they're sort of having this hands up approach of like, if developers want to build with them and integrate them, like, fine, which is obviously in contrast to Steam, who outright banned anything NFT related whenever that came 2 years ago at this point, probably. But
I think, so Epic has been,
thing.
Epic has been a little, and Epic is the company that makes Fortnite and the Unreal Engine, just in case you don't know, like a big, huge video game company. Epic has been mostly open to this idea rather than like, I mean, at one point the head of Epic was kind of very dismissive towards the idea of NFTs. And I think one of the things they just want to be is an open marketplace in some ways. Like, in fact, I think they just signed Gods Unchained, I think, just showed up in the Epic store, which is an interesting thing in the PC store.
Very cool.
So they're definitely open to this stuff. And, you know, obviously Epic has had their major kind of history with Apple and fighting Apple, and Apple has definitely feelings on you know, these sort of things as well, too. I think the interesting thing about this to me, again, goes back to what Nike's goals are here, right? Like, and what .Swoosh's goals are. And the thing that I keep coming back to, I'm writing a piece for the newsletter about this, but so much of what Nike wanted to do here was educate those people who didn't know what this stuff was. Like, they put a lot of time into identifying their hardcore sneakerhead users, which are these guys that have spent a lot of time collecting or understanding, you know, the sneakerhead culture. And our first one really calls back to all these really interesting old sneaker stuff, old sneaker, even memes and things like that. But visually, they're beautiful, right? Like, these are really cool shoes, and they're really cool varieties of these shoes. And like, that's where you connect. Like, you know, we talk about, you know, Gary Vee is very big on like the sports collectible, very big on the sports collectible market. In this instance, you've got these sneakerheads who may not know a lot about Web3, and you're educating them on like how they can own this digital good in the future. As people come up in this space, as younger kids grow up, they're just going to be native doing that. And I think Nike wants to be there because ultimately, I think Nike smartly, and Starbucks and all these other companies, see the digital marketplace as a much bigger margin business, because, like, you know, making shoes as a thing is not a great business.
Oh, the margins
right? Like,
on digital goods are freaking fantastic.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. So if you can create a digital
that,
good that people want, it's like, it's an incredible business. And I think ultimately Nike sees that as like a really big dollar sign line on its thing. But this goes back to what we said before. We are so early, everybody. We're so early, and maybe we're 10 years early because we may be that far away from a world where all this stuff is integrated across everything. And I would say one last thing on this, which is, this goes to my point as well. That world might be a world where AR glasses, everybody's got a pair, right? And if everybody's got a pair of AR glasses, and I've got a pair of Nike Air Force Ones that are on my feet when you look at me, that world is valuable across so many things, right? Like, that's digital fashion. That's, you know, owning things. It's like owning experiences in those spaces. And my gut is telling me that Nike is doing this .Swoosh thing as, like, you know, kind of planting a flag in the same way that they planted a flag when the Apple Watch first came out, which was, you know, they did Nike Run, the Nike Run app, and they were kind of like wanting to play around with the fitness on your, you know, wearable fitness stuff. This feels like the beginnings of that.
Yep. It's very interesting. I mean, I love it, certainly, and we're working our angles to hopefully get a Nike person on the podcast to talk about it, because I think these are the kinds of use cases that are really interesting to delve into, and these companies are figuring it out. I'm grateful to Nike for continuing to push forward on it all when we've seen so many brands have NFT plans and put them on ice. Fail, but then also I think there's so many brands who are like kind of putting whatever their plans were. Bail. Yeah. Or just like, I think a lot of companies are just like, again, they're just on ice. Like, I think they'll resurface them when it becomes cool again. But for now, they're just sort of waiting to see how the market plays out. Yeah. And look, I don't even blame companies for that necessarily. Everyone's got to make their own decisions and doesn't want to put a bunch of money into something that may be totally useless or whatever. And you do have to really commit to these things. But the sneaker brands are holding it down across the board. Adidas,
really
Nike, Puma, doing interesting things. All right, folks. That's our show. Have a very happy weekend. Oh, and a reminder that our event with Betty in LA, our next Overpriced Happy Hour event is in LA on July 7th. by the time you're hearing this, OPJ NFT holders and all Deadfella asset holders are eligible to go reserve your seat for this event. It's going to be at Danvers, which is in Culver City. So go ahead over to opjtour.com, reserve your seats. And also, I announced this on Wednesday, but the bottles of gin were bottled on Wednesday. So our gin is now in their bottles. It's now being shipped to its location from which we will actually start sending it out to NFT holders. So that might be another week or so process just to get everything over to the warehouse where it needs to be. But we will be announcing very soon when you can go online to redeem your bottle of gin, and then we can start shipping these bad boys out. Fun news. All right.
That's exciting.
With that, happy weekend, everyone. Talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Overpriced JPEGs. If you liked this conversation, if you liked this episode, please go ahead and hit subscribe. It helps me out, it helps the show out, and it means you will get alerts and updates when we post new content. Thanks again.